in this setting, people increase both their national pride as well as their ethnic pride. And so this actually makes us to question some of our assumptions about the process of identity formation.
Welcome to VoxDevTalks. My name is Tim Phillips. Travel, we're told, broadens the mind. And one way it can do this is to remove our distrust of people from different cultures. In Africa, some countries where national boundaries encompass many diverse ethnic groups have policies that require citizens, especially young people, to live in a different region of the country for a while. Oyebola Okunogbe of the World Bank Development Research Group has investigated the impact of one of these programs in Nigeria that increases the exposure of young graduates to other ethnic groups. And she joins me now. Oyebola, welcome to VoxDevTalks.
Hi, Tim. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Is this tendency of people to group together in cultural, religious groups that they identify with, is this something that we see all over the world?
Absolutely. I think this is something that's not limited to Africa. It's something we find everywhere. We see it in the United States, in political leanings, ethnic leanings, racial leanings. We see it all over the world. People just have a tendency to gravitate towards what is familiar, what is more comfortable. When you're with the people that are like you, you're not worried about what you're saying. You better understand social cues. It could even be safer for you in places with a lot of tension. So this definitely is a worldwide phenomenon.
Other examples where this grouping together has created or made worse civil conflict?
Absolutely. In fact, the program we're going to talk about today came in response to the most bloody civil conflict that has happened in Nigeria, which was the Civil War. And the way that happened, it was not too long after independence. There was a military coup that got branded as a coup by the Igbos. And so in the northern part of the country, there was a lot of violence that broke out against innocent people just because they happened to be the same ethnic group as the people who were branded as being the coup leaders. And so those individuals, literally people getting butchered on streets, go back home. So there's a mass exodus to their region of the country where they're from because that's where it's safe for them. And the leaders make the decision to secede from Nigeria. And so that then obviously leads to the federal government coming in full military force against the region. And so that's one example of how these ethnic identities get co-opted many times in the political process, and that could lead to massive violence.
Yeah, it's interesting how you describe that as I think identity's been co-opted in this process. What type of policies can we use in response to this to try and promote integration, make these sort of conflicts less likely?
A major way is to help people understand others. There's the idea that people fear what they do not understand. And if people are able to have direct contact with people from other parts of the country, then you have your own personal experience to go off of instead of just a leader, like a religious leader or an ethnic leader saying, oh, those people are the enemy and they are bad. If you're able to help people have direct experience and to better understand the other groups in the country, that could definitely help with these tensions.
So the program that we're going to be talking about today in Nigeria, it's called the NYSC program. It's very long-standing, still going on today, I think, isn't it? How does it work?
50 years.
50 years. How does it work? Who takes part in it?
It's a program for all college graduates. So as long as you graduate from a university, a polytechnic, before you are 30 years old, you are required to participate in this program. And it's a one-year program. The government decides where you complete your service. NYSC actually stands for National Youth Service Corps. And so all universities submit to the NYSC Secretariat the list of all their graduates for the year. And then the government decides where each person is going to serve. And when you are sent to a state, typically not your state of origin, that's one of the rules. There are very few exceptions that are made. You're sent to serve in that state. And for the first 3 weeks, you are on an orientation camp. I know that sounds a bit...
That sounds a bit scary.
It does. You're all wearing the same uniform. So it's almost like a paramilitary boot camp.
Yeah.
You're singing songs, chanting, doing activities, learning about the history of the state that you've been sent to. There might be some language classes on the side, but it's supposed to be this fun 3-week youth camaraderie building experience that you spend together out in the camps somewhere. And then after the 3 week of NYSC, you are assigned to a job that you do for the rest of the year. So this could be a government job. Most of these people are actually sent to be teachers in schools. More than half of NYSC participants are teachers in schools. But private companies can also request NYSC personnel to work in their companies. The government pays everyone a wage. As of the time of the study, was similar to the minimum wage in the country. So the minimum wage in the formal sector is definitely high compared to the rest of the country. Not very high, but it's livable, I would say. And the employer often would top up and give you a little extra. And so you're working at this job, and the idea is that by being immersed in community, in society, you're having a lot of interactions with people who are living in this state. And the idea is that this not only builds your own exposure to the groups that you're working among, but then it also helping you develop your own human capital. You have your first job experience that hopefully then helps you with subsequent work. So that's the program in a nutshell.
It's a huge program, isn't it? And a very long-standing one. Is it unique to Nigeria? Do other countries do something similar?
There's some other countries that have similar programs. The specifics would vary from place to place. In some places, it happens after high school. In some places, it's not compulsory. But one of the surveys that I looked at found 73 countries that had programs like this. And Nigeria's own is by far the largest in Africa. Nigeria is the most populous, and it's mandatory for all college graduates. So it is unique in those regards, but the general idea of having youth go and perform service is quite common across the world.
And the theory of change here, the mechanism by which this works, is our understanding that exposure to other cultures makes it less likely that we will find ourselves in conflict with them.
That's one of the main things. It's really that when you know more, it's less easy to other people because you have some first-hand exposure. That's one of the main ideas behind these programs.
Okay, so let's have a look at the research. What type of exposure to difference in Nigeria were you measuring the impact of here? Because I would imagine there's a lot of potential things you could measure, and you might end up with something that's not very manageable.
No, exactly. So that was a big question I had to think carefully about in trying to design this. So the design of the NYSC is that the government, like I said, takes the list of all college graduates and then, important, randomly assigns them to states for service. The first time I heard that the program was randomly assigned, my ears perked up. I'm like, okay, that means we can measure something. So
the two perfect words for an economist.
So what that results in is that in each state, there is a representative group of students, new graduates that have come from all over the country. So that's really great. And one initial design I thought about was we could just compare people who did not serve at all, so who did not participate in NYSC, so they didn't have this exposure with those who did, who were exposed to this diverse cohort. But that methodology didn't quite work out. And what I ended up doing instead was to compare among everyone who was assigned to go and serve. And then I compared those who were sent to serve in a state where they were the majority ethnicity. And so think about New Englanders. I used to live in Boston. So I'm from Massachusetts and I get sent to serve in Connecticut or whatever the British equivalent is.
We might not choose to get into that.
Let's divert. Let's go back.
Yeah, and you can be sure that the random assignment holds in this case. I did notice in your methodology that you used the assignment to another state as an instrument rather than directly.
Yes, no, that's a major issue that I had to deal with in this paper because there are people who would get sent to serve in a specific state of the country, but they're not happy with that state. They want to stay close to home or they want to go to a specific state. And so I'm able to access administrative data. So I can see from the administrative data where people were actually sent to. And then I can also see where they served from my interviews with them. And so I'm able to detect people who end up serving in a state that's different from the one that they were sent to. And so I'm able to use their administrative data, state of assignment as an instrument then for their state of service. There's another group who, from the very get-go, even before the administrative data comes out, they are able to be excluded from the randomization process. So they are manually assigned. And this, I actually just ask them, and people are quite honest about it. They say, I was able to influence, is the term they use, influence my posting. And so for those people, I just keep them out of the sample because their own postings are not randomly assigned. And for each of these two groups that I described, there's about 10% each for those two groups, yeah.
We joked about the regional differences in the UK or the US, but tell me directly about the life of someone in a treatment group in Nigeria. How big are the cultural differences between the regions there? What are their daily lives like when they are living with people from a different culture?
Yeah, so Nigeria has over 200 ethnic groups, and the group that I work with that are in the sample, they're all Yorubas. Yorubas are one of the big three, and they're in the southwestern part of the country. So the university that I partner with, most of the graduates are Yoruba, so I focus on the sample that's exclusively Yoruba. And so they'll be moving to other parts of the country. And compared to other parts, Yorubas would have some of the highest levels of education. They tend to be more urban than the rest of the country. These 200 groups I refer to, they're not just dialects, they're actual languages that are not understandable by people who don't speak the language.
Wow.
In terms of religion, the two main religions in Nigeria are Islam and Christianity. Yorubas tend to be both. You tend to have Yorubas that are Christian and Yorubas that are Muslim. And so these different dimensions of difference that they're facing in moving to other parts of the country are something that I also think carefully about, because now it's not just that I'm moving to a non-Yoruba part of the country, but I'm also moving to a place that is further away from home, a place that is poorer on average. And so doing analysis, I'm trying to control for all these other features of difference. But back to your question about what this means on a day-to-day. On a day-to-day, it means that I'm probably a teacher in a school with students who speak very little English, and I have to find a way to communicate advanced geometry to them in a way that they would understand. And overall, deal with my co-teachers. I might make friends with my co-teachers to help me to interpret in my classrooms. I might speak to some parents when they come and pick up their kids from my school. But it's really being in a completely new world and learning what it means to cope, how to buy things in the market. Yes, so those are some of the dimensions of difference that our participants would face.
How did you measure the impact of this, what sounds like a really quite intense program? How did you get the data on this to measure the impact on attitudes and the behavior of the participants to other ethnic groups?
Yes, getting the data was a bit of a challenge. I was very fortunate to find a university that would partner with me to be able to conduct an alumni survey for them.
Ah, right.
Because I didn't want to come to people saying, oh, I'm from the NYSC, I want to ask you about your attitudes, because you might expect that could lead to bias where people feel this program was supposed to make me behave in a certain way. I'm going to report that I am behaving in that certain way. So instead, we said, oh, we're from this university and would like to learn about the alumni trajectories over the last 8 years since you finished your service. Since you graduated. We did a phone survey using alumni contact information to call people, because now people were living all over the country. Some had even moved out of Nigeria. And so we used a snowball approach. As we're able to reach some people, we asked them for the contact of their other classmates, and that's how we're able to conduct the survey. And in the survey, I have questions on not only their attitudes, ethnic pride, national pride, and things like that, but also what we call revealed preference outcomes, like where are you actually living now? Who are you married to? Who are you friends with? Who have you dated? There was also a little quiz in there measuring their knowledge of different states. So what is the capital of XYZ state, on who's the governor of this other state, and really trying to see how much people knew about the country, how engaged they were, in addition to their stated attitudes.
And I think you said it was 8 years after that you're doing this measurement, so it's not capturing the immediate effect, but long-term changes in attitudes.
Exactly. So it's 8 years after they've graduated, 7 years after the program that they participated in. That was exactly what I was trying to do. I was trying to find a cohort that was far enough from the program where it wouldn't just be the immediate indoctrination you've received on the camps about how you should behave and attitude you should have, but also wanted them to have had enough life experience. Some of them have gotten married. We've also had people be more established in their professional lives. And so we can also look at migration outcomes. So that was specifically the goal of capturing a cohort a bit further out.
Okay, so big question. Does serving in this program outside your home state promote integration afterwards?
Yes.
Ah. Oh, thank you.
I would say that it is a very nuanced effect that I find, though. I said the yes just to release the tension in the room. I think some of the most important metrics of integration, we do see impacts on that. So the first one is really, where do people choose to live outside after this program? If I'm a Yoruba, do I still only think that the only place I can live in Nigeria is a Yoruba state? And for context, only about 5% of Yoruba people live outside a Yoruba state in the country. And so what this program does is that compared to our control group who served in a Yoruba state, of which only 3% are living outside in a non-Yoruba state, 15% of people who are sent to serve outside of their own region are now living outside. And so there's this five-fold increase in your willingness and your likelihood today to be living outside your own ethnic group. And so to me, that's a major shift in people's mindsets, their beliefs about the country and where in the country they can call their home. Related to that is the fact that people now actually know more. They simply just know more about the country. And so I was describing the earlier questions about, the governors and the capitals. People are able to give correct answers to those questions significantly at a higher rate than the people who served within their own region. There's also question about national pride. How proud are you to be a Nigerian? And there we also find impacts that people's sense of national pride increases in response to this exposure where they've lived outside of their ethnic group.
I see. So it's not just about meeting other groups. You really do feel more of a national Nigerian identity at the end of this.
I think so, because in addition to this results, the empirical and quantitative results that I have, I also do a number of focus groups with people who have completed these programs, just trying to understand how exactly did this change you. And some of the stories are really things like driving across the country. It took me 14 hours to get to the states where I served, and driving from the south to the north and watching the landscape change, going from state to state and really seeing the beauty of the country, seeing this whole expanse is Nigeria and this is the entity that I belong to. There was something about that process that seemed to really have shaped people in their sense of how they think about themselves. And I think another thing is really about this fear of the other, because we also have a hypothetical question in there about if you were offered a 10% or 50% increase in salary for a job that was in a Hausa state, for example, how likely would you be to take it? So in here, trying to keep constant any information people might have about job opportunities in different parts of the country, but just saying, if you were given this job with this amount of money, how willing would you be to take it? And we find that those who've been exposed to other parts of the country, they're more likely and more willing to say that they would take that job. And so essentially, we are seeing people willing to leave money on the table if they've not been exposed to those parts of the country. And I think that from the interviews, there seems to be this fear of the other. Many people just feel like once you say a state in the north, they're thinking Sharia law, they're thinking violence, they're thinking it's unsafe, they're thinking let me not even get close there. But people who've experienced other parts of the country, a bit of that fear is diminished in their choices that they're willing to make.
But one thing I note that you are not saying, does this lessen their identity with their own group? Do people feel less Yoruba when they feel more Nigerian?
No, that's, I think, the really interesting part of this paper that I was referring to when I said it's a very nuanced answer, because actually they don't feel less Yoruba. They feel more Yoruba compared to the people who did not leave the ethnic homeland. And this, I think, is one of those findings that going in, it's a bit puzzling, but once you think about it a bit more, it becomes really clear. And the idea is that people, for many of them, for the first time in their life, are moved away from a Yoruba state to live as a minority. Remember, Yorubas are a big group. They're a majority in their home state. Now they're a minority in a different state. And their own ethnic identity becomes a lot more salient to them because they are now surrounded by people from other groups. And, people were saying things like, oh, they would always call me like, oh, the Yoruba man or the Yoruba woman. And even just internally, they realize that they are no longer the majority group, and the dimensions of other cultures that are different from theirs are very obvious to them. And there's social identity theory where people are in these types of situations, you tend to then think about your own culture more favorably in response to learning and experiencing these other cultures. So that was one main finding, that people's own ethnic pride actually increased when they are living outside their ethnic homeland during national service.
Many policymakers right at this moment would feel very uncomfortable about this, what seems to be a contradiction. Many of us would assume that peace building and moves to sort of national democracy can only be effective when those ethnic identities are put aside. And should they feel worried? Do you disagree with this?
I can hear that concern. In fact, there's a quote by the president of Mozambique, who has a speech where he says that for the nation to live, the tribe must die. And that's the exact sentiment, that people need to choose one. But what I'm finding is that actually it doesn't seem like that's always has to be the case. In this setting, people increase both their national pride as well as their ethnic pride. And in fact, I have a question in there that says, if you had to choose one between the two, which of the two do you feel more connected with? And I actually don't see any impact on that. And so this actually makes us to question some of our assumptions about the process of identity formation. Does it always have to be one identity at the expense of the other? And I think this result is saying that no, it does not. And another setting that's useful for thinking about this question of competing identities is when you think about migrants. Let's say someone moved from Ghana to the US, you find that they're able to feel a stronger sense of identity with their host country, so with the host community, and at the same time with their home community. And so you find that these identities are not always in conflict in every setting.
It's a fascinating piece of research, and it's extremely important for the way that millions, billions of people are living today. Thank you very much for talking about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
The paper is called "Does Exposure to Other Ethnic Regions Promote National Integration? Evidence from Nigeria." And Oyebola's the author of it. You will find it on the World Bank's website as a working paper from 2018. But I believe you also have a forthcoming publication in the American Economic Journal Applied Economics. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
It's a fascinating piece of research.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been a VoxDev Talk. The best way to make sure you don't miss an episode is to subscribe on your podcast platform. Wherever you find your podcast, you will find us there and our past episodes. As always, are at voxdev.org, where we also have articles about the papers we feature.